Hey, I'm Nick DiMatteo, and welcome to video episode number 58. And if you're listening on the podcast platform, season 3, episode 15 of Music is Not a Genre. Each week I take a release from my collection, I discuss it, I give you my take on it, I throw in some interesting bits and bobs, and I connect it to my music, and other things in the world. Trying to bust myths and break down barriers and things like that. Thank you to all of my Patreon patrons, to anyone who has subscribed to my YouTube channel, who has watched, listened on the podcast platforms, clicked and shared, especially shared. I appreciate all of this. If you've read the text, if you've checked out the music, the links I put to the music, I appreciate every single bit of it, and thank you so much. You know my objectives. I say it at the end. I like to say it at the beginning right now because I think it's important. My objectives are music, conversation, and connection, and not necessarily in that order. So thank you. This week is exciting for me, as I hope it always is, and that's because I am actually in the midst of something that I have called in another podcast a chronolography, where I listen to an artist's entire catalog in chronological order, and every one of them you learn something different, right? And I've talked about the what the great benefits are of doing this and how it really doesn't take very long, right? So this week's topic, the title is "When the Clash Became Bad: A Stellar Second Act." If you know anything about either of those bands, you know the joke that I went for there. But if not, that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to explain it. So what I did was, and I honestly don't remember why I was prompted to do this. I think it was a song I heard or something like that. They were on my list. I went back and listened to the entire catalog of The Clash, and then followed through like I do with many bands. What I do when I do a chronolography is, if any of the band members were one of the primary forces behind the band, primary creative force, one of the songwriters, lyricists, whatever, and went on to another part of their career doing something else, either solo, with a band, what have you, I will then follow that thread and listen to that as well. So, for example, when I already knew really all the Beatles catalog, but when I went back and listened through to it, I then listened to the solo careers of every single Beatle, including Wings and all that for Paul McCartney. And I've done that, like I said, with any band that I start. I follow it all through all the way to the end. And it's really cool because you get to hear where those subsequent bands and the type of music that they do came from. Let's say you're someone who only knew the second band or the second part of the career. Then you get to find out where it came from. Or if you only knew the first, you get to see where it went. And so with The Clash, I knew a bit of both. And let me give you some examples of how I classify these. Not that it matters, because really it's all cool, and anybody who's that passionate about music continues a career. So some go on to solo careers, like when Ozzy Osbourne left Black Sabbath. So when I listen to Black Sabbath, I listen to all their first part of their career, and to the Ronnie James Dio era, and anything even after that, and all the reunions straight up to their latest. I also, though, listen to Ozzy. I even listened to Tony Iommi's solo album. I think he just had one, can't remember. But again, main creative forces. Some don't go on to solo careers. They go on to a different strain of music career, such as Danny Elfman. If you know him at all, you know him because he scores film and TV, The Simpsons theme. He's worked on so many different films. But he got his start as part of the band Oingo Boingo, which actually had quite a few hits, a solid number of hits. And when I don't really know that, I haven't done their chronolography, so I don't know their history. But when they broke up or however it happened, he went on and continued his much, much longer and more successful career scoring. Some do the retread circuit. They stop making new music. They go on to do tours and things like that of all of their old music, and take it or leave it, like it or not, that happens out there. But then there are those who feel the need to reinvent the band experience. Paul McCartney and Wings is one that you would think of as a prime example of someone who had nearly as much success with the second band as he did with the first, right? I mean, you can't really top the Beatles, but you know what I'm talking about if you know any music from the 1970s, right? Well, the Clash, the main creative forces in the Clash were Joe Strummer and Mick Jones. And so I am in the midst of this chronolography. I've listened through all of the Clash. I've listened through the first part of Mick Jones' after Clash career. I've listened to all of Joe Strummer's after Clash career, and I haven't quite gotten to the rest of it. But what happened was this. So just a quick, if you know the Clash. If you don't know the Clash, I'm not sure why you're listening to this, but hello, hi, and it's very nice to see you or sense you out there. But the Clash were a seminal punk band from Britain. They explored personal things, political things, all of that. They very quickly, after the first couple of albums, branched out into many, many, many different styles, including reggae and rockabilly and a whole bunch of ska, a bunch of other things. And had a very brief career, a relatively brief career, but hugely successful and hugely influential. The punks back then, after a while, stopped kind of respecting them because they decided to go their own way and do their own thing and not adhere to strict punk rules, so to speak. Although I think punk is more of an aesthetic and an attitude than a sound, but I'm going to get into that later. It's kind of why I, put these two together. So around, I'm not going to go through the whole Clash history, although I will get to a little bit later. The 83-ish, 84, two of the band members left, or I think one was kicked out, and Mick Jones left. And he formed a band called General Public that did not last long. He wasn't really a part of the recording, so I didn't listen to that. Say what you will about that. And then he formed a band, Top Risk Action Company, T.R.A.C, which didn't do anything other than get together and get some ideas, but it's considered the precursor to the band that he really formed in 84, Big Audio Dynamite, this is one of their albums right there. And Big Audio Dynamite released their first album in 1985, and they released 9 albums from 85 to, I believe, around 97. So a long career, and actually longer than the Clash. And then, just to follow the thread, right after that, Joe Strummer did his solo thing with a band called the Mescaleros, put out 3 albums, sadly died age 50 of a heart attack. Shortly after that, and this was after Big Audio Dynamite had broken up, Mick Jones formed another band, Carbon Silicon. That's the one I haven't listened to yet. I'll update you. I don't know if I'm going to update you. I have no idea. But the point being, there's more to go, and I'm excited about that. I want to see where that heads. Well, one of the things that made the Clash was they found every possible way to buck convention, right? They subverted all kinds of rules and conventions, whether it had to do with what you can and can't do, so to speak, in music or in a song or on an album, what you can and can't do in the industry. Perfect example being they wanted to release London Calling as a double album, and they got a tremendous amount of resistance from the record label, which they ended up winning that, and they did release it as a double album. But at the same time, Bruce Springsteen released The River as a double album, and they were on the same label as Bruce Springsteen, and he got no resistance whatsoever. So they were a little pissed at that. So they came back and said, okay, for our next release, Sandinista, we're going to go ahead and make it a triple album. And released that, and even took a pay cut in terms of royalties in order to help people afford to buy this triple album. And if you know anything about the Clash, you know that London Calling, Sandinista, Combat Rock, those are those are the sweet spot as far as awesomeness for them, although there's something great on every album. Even the album they did after Mick Jones left in '85, which is kind of weird in terms of its production, had some good things on it. So they were like, they were interested in making the music they wanted to make and putting it out and having people hear it. And the music they wanted to make increasingly did not fit into a category. Certainly had elements of punk to it in terms of sound, but what was the most punk about it was their attitude towards sharing music and making music in any possible way, and in saying screw you to the industry, we're going to do what we want to do because the most important thing here is the music. Well, so Mick Jones forms Big Audio Dynamite, and he took a lot of the elements that he had contributed, or to the Clash, or learned from the Clash as well, and brought them over. But then also added electronic elements, more funk. Although the Clash did do some funk and even disco. Funny enough, Big Audio Dynamite, the more electronic, more dance. They added some hip hop. They added Afrobeat, world elements, and heavy sampling. So many samples from film, samples from other songs. Just incredible how many samples are on each album. Not to mention there were some songs themselves that had 15 samples, which I'm actually going to get to in terms of this week's release. And so, Mick Jones carried on that legacy and that attitude from the Clash of wanting to do whatever music he wanted to do with his bandmates, of course, and their input. And Big Audio Dynamite put out, I believe it was 4 albums. And then he restructured the band and called it Big Audio Dynamite 2. Put out another album called Kool-Aid. And then he put out this album. And for you listeners and non-viewers out there, I'm holding it up to the screen. It says Bad to the Globe. The Globe, 1991. So if you're counting, I believe that's album number 6, right? And this was the peak of their success. This was where the song Rush came from, Situation No When, that song, where the Globe came from, and several other good, really, really good songs. The whole album is really good. And so they had achieved kind of the heights of success the way the Clash had, and in some ways even more so at the time. So that was 91. Bad 2 put out one more album under that name, and then put out an album under the name Big Audio, and then in 95, so that's 94, 95, something like that. And then put out one final album in 97 under the original name Big Audio Dynamite. And, some fluctuating things in the middle as far as what I liked and what didn't resonate with me, but the experimentation was there all the way through. I mean, there were songs that were 6, 7, 8, 10 minutes with a lot of repetition and a lot of sampling and cutting and things like that, and elements that included all of the types of music that I mentioned before and then some. And so it was their way, again, of doing, well, this is what we're going to do. We're just going to subvert the industry and subvert the idea of what it means to make music and what music can be and put it out. I mean, think of the song Rush, right? If you know it, and you know not just the single edit, but the full version, you know that right in the middle of it, it just stops, and there's a dude talking about music, and the music that accompanies it changes. And it doesn't transition back into the faster pace song that you know until, a good minute, at least, if not longer. And that's not something you do, and especially not in a song that has a dance beat. You don't just all of a sudden stop for that long of a time. But that's what they did. It's one of the things they did. Not in every song. I mean, there were some songs that were just straight up dance or straight up rock that just went, or even reggae or ska, that went straight through with the same beat, but they had other experimental elements in them. And what I'm curious about is then with Carbon Silicon, apparently they added back, especially in the last Big Audio Dynamite album, and the last two really, but especially the last one, more rock elements to it. I believe that carried through to Carbon Silicon, but had a very, again, electronic, kind of glitch and sampling bass to it. One of the things that I read was that Mick Jones and the band decided that the most important thing, again, was the music and sharing the music with people. So they released it for free on their own website, which, when you think of somebody like Lars Ulrich from Metallica, who was so pissed way back when Napster and things like that, where people could get music for free, that's revolutionary for an artist. Now, a couple of things there. When you're a struggling artist, when you're a struggling artist, you want to make as much money as you can so you can continue your career, right? When you're a successful artist, there are times where you want to make money. Now, the thing is, when you're successful, there are other ways to earn it, on royalties from old songs or touring or various other things. You get more work because people know you, etc. So it's easier for somebody like Mick Jones to release the music for free, but it's still not easy in that, do you know Carbon Silicon? Have you ever heard of them? I read their name 3 times over a couple-week period before I remembered it. And I'll remember it now once I listen to all their albums very soon. But, they took a hit for this, because I would imagine that the record company was like, well, what can we do with you? And so it was like, well, we're not going to play this game. We're going to release the music we want to release and do it straight to the people. And my take on that as a creator is, I would rather more people hear my music in whatever possible way they can, whether that means for hundredths of a cent per stream, sadly, or buying the actual, music off of my website or anything, or just finding it somehow for free, or it was shared by someone. All that is awesome to me. If the money will come or not come in whatever way that it does, but the fact that the music is shared and being heard is what is the most important thing to me as well. And I think this goes back in part to what I wanted to touch on with the idea of the punk aesthetic, which is that punk is not a sound. And I think the people who got stuck there really almost ceased to be punk. They might have sounded punk, but they became so structured in the decisions they made about what their music could be that they lost that punk attitude and aesthetic, which is anything goes, which is don't follow the rules, or make your own rules and then break your own rules. And that's something that the members of the Clash did really well. And like I said, in particular here, Mick Jones, listen to Rush, listen to The Globe, this album, and then go back and listen to Combat Rock, and that's 9 years apart. It's a world of difference. You'll hear similarities. You'll hear things in there that carried over, but the music doesn't sound the same. Even though he sampled "Should I Stay or Should I Go" for the Globe, the song "The Globe," the music you could clearly is very different. More electronic and etc. etc. That's not the point. The point is that punk is the attitude you bring to it. Punk is, we're not in it for the money, we're in it for the music. Punk is, they tell you you have to do a 3-minute song, we'll do a 20-minute song, or 17-minute song. There was one of Joe Strummer's songs from the Mescalero was 17 minutes. Or they'll tell you that you have to have a steady beat for 4 minutes. We're going to stop in the middle of the song and do a completely different beat. Just subverting convention left and right. And, that is something that I always admire. I always admire bands and artists who do a mix of styles. That's the whole point. Music is not a genre, right? And what I didn't know, though, until I listened through to all this, I had a sense that Big Audio Dynamite had some influence on me, but I didn't know how much until I started listening back to their first few albums. In particular, their first, third, and sixth albums. This one here, The Globe, is the sixth. There are songs on there, and even their second album to some degree, and I believe a song off of their fourth, but the fifth wasn't released in the US, and much of the fifth album ended up on the sixth album anyway in different form. But there were songs on there that I hadn't heard in decades, and they just came right back to me. Like the song Escarita or Champagne. I think they're both from Tighten Up Volume 88, which the first album and third are probably my favorites as far as straight through listening experiences, although the sixth, gives them a run for their money. But those songs on there, A Party, which is something about lions in the jungle or something like that. I mean, I can't even begin to explain how I listen to these songs and like, why do I know them so well? And I haven't heard them in so long. And I think you can hear that influence and that sense of kind of doing what I want to do and mixing things up in a sense. And a lot of what I do, including the song that I included here, which is off my band Rex album, Syzygy for the Weird, a recent album from the box set The Weird Objective, and the song is called Make Me Mic My Mouth. But honestly, you could pick, I would say, at least a third of the songs from The Weird Objective, like 10 songs, and you would get a sense of that punk aesthetic of, this is what I'm doing. The whole idea of releasing a 32-track, box set as a relative unknown that is multi-genre, among other things, is being a little rebellious. It's being a little punk. It's being like, this is not how you play the game, right? Well, now it is. This is what I want to do, and I have precursors like Big Audio Dynamite and The Clash to thank for that, among many other bands. Do you know The Clash? Actually, I want to say this. I'm going to say it before I wrap up, just because it's another great example. When Nirvana broke up because Kurt Cobain, Dave Grohl came out of the gate and formed Foo Fighters and has been successful for 25 years and is now an elder statesman that is revered, and as he and his band should be, took elements of Nirvana and did a whole bunch of other things with them that Nirvana might have gone on to do, who knows. But the point is, he was one of the, and he was sort of not even really one of the main creative forces behind Nirvana, because they weren't around long enough for him to really spread his wings in that way. But man, talk about doing what you want and doing it well, and just wanting to reinvent that band experience, in a different way than Mick Jones did, but similar in terms of attitude. Do you know Big Audio Dynamite? Do you remember any of them? Do you remember their big song Rush? Do you remember other of their songs? Do you know The Clash? Do you hear similarities in those two bands? I would love to know that. How do those bands connect other than the Mick Jones factor? How do they connect sonically, creatively? Are there other incredible second act reinventions that you have always loved that you would like to talk about? Please comment. Let me know what you think about any of this. Let me know your experience with this journey, because as always, my objectives here are music, conversation, and connection. Thank you once again, and I will talk to you next week.